Afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Denton, and I'm ACT's Membership Experience Manager. We are going to go ahead and kick things off here. It's 2:01. I want to thank you all for joining us today on ACT's July webinar entitled How Transportation Technology Can Help Maintain Public Health During Crises and Beyond. This is sponsored by TransLoc. Thank you. Before we hear from our presenters this afternoon, I wanted to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. First of all attendees are on mute during this webinar. If you have a question or have a problem hearing us, please type it in the chat box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer your questions as the webinar gets going. Second, we will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type your questions in as we go in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen as well. When you're asking a question, please identify who the question is for when you're typing it. And finally, this session is being recorded. We'll have the recording up on the website, the ACT website, within 24 hours after the presentation ends. And so now I'd like to pass things over to David Strauss, ACT's Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT is currently working on. David?
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, and welcome to all of you joining us today. As the premier association for TDM professionals, ACT, its goal is to build a strong community of individuals and organizations working to advance and implement TDM at their work sites and within their communities. Webinars like today's are an important benefit to you as a member of ACT, providing you with valuable information on latest trends and important knowledge to make you more impactful in the work that you do. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to update everyone on some news from the organization. It's truly exciting that in just 10 days, nearly 300 TDM professionals will be gathering in Walt Disney World for our 35th annual international conference, our first in-person conference in nearly 20 months. The event promises to be a great return to in-person learning and networking, with strong keynote speakers, 27 breakout sessions, presentation of our national awards, and of course, the atmosphere of the most magical place on earth. I want to extend a great thanks to all of you that will be attending, the dozens of individuals that have spent months planning the event, and all of our tremendous sponsors and exhibitors for their support. I look forward to seeing many of you there. There is still time to register, so if you are interested, visit the website. ACT is continuing to engage with Congress on the development of a transportation authorization infrastructure bills. Building on our success of including the definitions of TDM and TDM strategies within the House's Invest in America Act, along with the inclusion of billions of dollars to support TDM programming, we're also able to include an amendment to incorporate TDM within the CMAQ program through Representative Garcia, who's also the lead sponsor of our More Through TDM Act. ACT continues to work with the Senate EPW committee to incorporate TDM in its version of authorization. Through these efforts, Senator Duckworth introduced an amendment to incorporate the definition of TDM and TDM strategies in the Senate bill. And now ACT's Government Affairs team is working aggressively to build support for the inclusion of TDM in the Senate side. Stay tuned for information on how each of you can assist in these outreach efforts and help in this cause. We recently completed nominations for ACT's Board of Directors, and on August 11th, voting will open. We are grateful for the members that have submitted their nominations, expressing an interest in serving the organization and giving back to the industry. Please make sure to review the candidates in advance of the elections. There'll be a booklet that goes out, and participate in this year's important board elections process. To the non-members on the webinar today, welcome. I hope that you'll give serious thought to joining ACT and becoming a member of our great community of over 1,300 TDM professionals. There's tremendous value that you receive when coming together within the largest association for TDM professionals. After today's event, you'll receive a note from Elizabeth Denton, who finally is up on the camera here, so you can put a name to the face or a face to the name. Our membership experience manager, offering an opportunity to connect and learn more about ACT. And I hope you take her up on the offer. So now it's on to today's webinar, how transportation technology can help maintain public health during crises and beyond. A vital resource for municipalities and hospitals alike, transportation is the backbone of our communities. As crises arise, the way transit is used can greatly affect those communities. In the wake of COVID-19 and the pandemic, transportation adopted an entirely new meaning. One was rooted in maintaining public health first and foremost. In this session, we'll learn how transportation providers, through the use of technology, were able to quickly adapt the way they use transit to continue supporting their communities while maintaining both accessibility and safe social distancing guidelines, and what this means for the future of transit. It's now my pleasure to introduce our two speakers. Sam Veraldi is Senior Strategic Policy Specialist at TransLoc, part of Ford Mobility's portfolio. With nearly 20 years of experience in parking and transportation industry, providing leadership in the campus and private sector spaces, he's now one of TransLoc's resident policy experts, where he uses his talents to help guide company strategy to improve equity and access in transit technology. His unique blend of experience spans multiple areas, including leading world-class universities, municipalities, and airports. Sam has also spent the last 25 years as an instructor at Duke University, where he currently teaches managerial finance, municipal finance, and strategy. And joining Sam, we have Rebecca Schenck, started working at Napa Valley Transportation Authority in August 2016. Is currently the transit manager. At NVTA, she has the opportunity to apply best practices in planning and development learned as a consultant and staff member in large cities to improve the daily commute experience for Napa County residents and visitors. She has a master's degree in city and regional planning from the University of North Carolina and an undergraduate degree in economics from Denison University. Sam, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, David. Really appreciate that, and certainly appreciate what ACT does for our community at large. We cannot thank you guys enough for all the things that you do provide to help us from TDM and commuter transit, but all the resources that you also make available to us, not just reports, but webinars like this. And clearly anybody who hasn't signed up for the conference, and as David said, there's still time, certainly encourage you to do that. It's going to be a valuable resource, and we are all excited to be back face to face and having the opportunity to actually network with all our friends that we've missed for so long. Certainly a thanks to TransLoc, my employer. I don't know if Laren or Moore want to say anything at this point. Okay, I'll take that as a proceed. But really certainly want to make sure that everyone knows I have eternal thanks today for Rebecca. I know that she's used our planning and design services, but the real important message today are the things that she's gone through and the extraordinary challenges that she has made at Napa Valley. And certainly we're going to highlight those today and offer an opportunity for us all as professionals to have a dialogue at the end to experience some of the things that she's gone through and the massive changes that she certainly has had to do as a result of pre-COVID, COVID, and now post-COVID, and what we're looking to forecast for going into the future. So Rebecca, I'm going to start with you and let us tell us a little bit about your pre-COVID services, ridership, routes, fixed route, on-demand, service hours, buses. And I know we've got a map we're going to bring up, but I'll turn it over to you for a little bit of an overview.
Right, perfect. So yes, kind of in a pre-COVID era, just to give you a little context, here at the Napa Valley Transportation Authority, we operate the services throughout Napa County and kind of all of the cities and the unincorporated areas. And then we also travel to a county just east of us, as well as counties south to us that more connects us to the San Francisco Bay Area through, if you see at the bottom of the map there, the El Cerrito del Norte BART station. So prior to COVID, we did just over 1 million rides a year on 14 fixed routes, which you're seeing kind of on the map, some of them on the map here. These are for regional routes, as well as we did 6 on-demand shuttles that went door to door using the TransLoc platform. And then we were also operating ADA service. And those hours were roughly 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., varying slightly by service. And so then kind of during COVID, you look at fiscal year 2020, because in our world, kind of COVID started in March of 2020, our ridership dropped given those last 3 months and the impact on COVID to about 830,000 rides, down from the 1 million. And then in 2021, with the whole year really impacted by COVID, we are more at 420,000 rides. So knowing that, we had to operate a much different service. So as I mentioned, we were doing the 14 fixed routes and the 6 on-demand shuttles, and we kind of did a flip in some way, and that we still continued to operate the 4 regional fixed routes that you see on the map here. And then looking at the local routes, we went from having 8 local routes in the city of Napa, which is our largest jurisdiction, to operating strictly on demand within the city of Napa. And so that was by far our biggest change at the end of the day. And what we decided to do in this case, because we had to do it so quickly, is as opposed to going, say, door to door like we do with on demand in smaller jurisdictions, we were really going from bus stop to bus stop, because we're still operating with the same fleet. We didn't miraculously somehow have a different fleet that materialized in March of 2020. We still had to use our mix of 28 to 40-foot vehicles. So we did have some limits, things like turning radiuses and all that exist in the world. And then the local map that you're seeing here, as you see, effective May 9th of 2021, is kind of what we're looking at in what we'll call a post-COVID era, in that we have 2 fixed routes and then on-demand service overlaid over that. So this is kind of the direction that we're going as a result of having really a solid experience with on-demand. We'd like to keep that as part of our portfolio in the city of Napa.
Rebecca, as that ridership change, and you talked about that kind of inflection point of March and what happened, we saw that the volumes changed. That was certainly important, and it made some modifications to your schedule. But where were most of your riders' destinations? Where were they trying to go at that point? And what was the demographic of your rider base?
So essential worker in Napa means a little different than essential worker, I think, in other places. And that includes agricultural workers, which in this case is people working in the wine industry. So while the tasting rooms, hospitality, things like that were closed, we still needed people to work in the cellars as well as in the vineyard. So we continued to offer transportation to those people who are riding more of the regional routes that travel throughout up and down the valley, I should say. So that, and then we saw a lot of runs from from basically a person's house to Walmart, Target, grocery store, the kind of those basic services that they still needed. And that was very different. Say, we didn't see the school trips that we saw before. We didn't see the 9 to 5 work commutes that we saw before. It was mainly focused on vineyard workers and then grocery trips.
Great. I know you used our planning and design services to help you look at and evaluate some of the changes. Can you tell us a little bit about that perspective and how that worked and how that helped you formulate what you're doing?
And so, we had always contemplated in a way, since we were using TransLoc services already on our small jurisdictions, and those are basically jurisdictions that have 5,000 people or less, to do on-demand door-to-door. We'd always contemplated, okay, how could we do this in the city of Napa? Well, the COVID gave us a good opportunity to try that. And so without a lot of planning, not going to lie, we went from those 8 fixed routes to the on-demand. But then when it was like, okay, starting to see maybe light at the end of the tunnel in the January timeframe, when we thought, all right, how are we going to prepare for the future? That's when we really reached out to TransLoc to do some real planning. And so at that point, then we'd started on-demand in April. So they had about 9 months of data through the end of December. And they took that data and said, okay, this is where people are going. This are your kind of OD pairs. This is where people are getting on and off. And these are the places that you could potentially serve with fixed route if you wanted to do more of a hybrid option. So they took a look at that and gave us a series of recommendations on what fixed routes may work. And then once we decided on basically 3 potential fixed route options, they ran a series of analysis on it to say, okay, well, if you did this fixed route and then you had 4 on-demand vehicles, say with that fixed route, this is what we think your wait times would be on average and like your 95th percentile wait times. So that gave us a good idea and really helped us hone in on one option, which was that north and south route that you saw on the local side of things. And they did a pretty good job as we were looking at our June numbers. Our deviations between fixed route and on-demand were about what they had anticipated, and that we were doing about 230 rides per day within the city of Napa on the on-demand side. And then we had about the same number of riders on fixed route as they had predicted. So that gave us a good idea. But that was just kind of our mid-growth scenario, those 230 trips a day. So now we're preparing for the future growth scenario that they had outlined, and in going to introduce 2 new fixed routes to kind of serve a school come August, but we'll still have the on-demand. So we'll really have kind of a true hybrid, almost 50-50 between fixed route and on-demand.
So thank you for that. And so, you know, one of the things I think that we're all concerned about, and even today, and we'll talk about some of the things for the Delta variant and preparations as we go into the fall, but safety protocols during this time challenged everybody. So can you talk a little bit about what safety protocols you put in place, and if any of those have changed since then? But what was the main focus at that point?
Yeah, I'm sure like many of you, right, you're getting directions from federal government, from the state government, from maybe your region or your local government. So we are constantly kind of sorting through those. Can't tell you how many times our public information officer changed our mask signs. Basically at the height of COVID and continuing on to now, we've had a mask requirement on our buses. In the beginning of COVID, we did rear door boarding, and that meant that we stopped collecting fares for about those first 5 months until we could get kind of plexiglass barriers up there for our drivers. And then we started doing front door boarding again. And we followed a tiered system here in California. And so in kind of adhering with the tier system, we kept, depending on the size of the vehicle, depending on the numbers, basically 6 feet of distance between riders, and limited that. And that was something that was really easy to manage in terms of on demand. On fixed route, that was a lot trickier. I'm sure some of you may have had pass ups and such. If you were trying to limit the number of people on your vehicle, you had no way of knowing how many people were going to be right at a given bus stop. But with the on demand, and when they are making the reservations on the app or over the phone, we could set that limit based upon the vehicle. So if we knew there was a said vehicle, only 6 people could fit on there safely, right, with the 6 feet of distance, we could set that parameters and on demand. So that made managing that simpler.
So one of the other things as we all go through transformations like this, and I think it's safe to say that everybody's gone through some incredible transformations, what's your approval process in your municipality, in your area, that you have to go through when you're making these kind of changes?
Sure. I think there's like maybe business as usual protocol, right? And then there was, in a way, emergency protocols. And it turns out it's a lot easier to cut service, I guess, in some ways than it ever is to add it, as we're kind of finding out. But in terms of our approval process, we actually were able to move pretty quickly because in this case, we had an existing contract, right, with TransLoc. And so we happened to have a board meeting on May the 18th, and kind of COVID really hit, or we got a sense of what was going to happen on the 12th. So we were able to amend our contract with TransLoc to include some additional jurisdictions, the city of Napa, at that point. And so that kind of moved forward when we were able to execute by the end of March to get kind of our hardware orders in, which was very key. And it wasn't too hard in that we were still serving the same service area. So it wasn't as though, okay, we're not going to be giving certain people service, or we are going to be giving other people service, however you want to think about it. We kept our same service area. So in terms of Title VI or kind of other federal requirements, we were within that. And then we did have to work with our contractor, who's TransDev, on kind of their overall budget for operating services. But within their contract, we were able to kind of reduce our service hours by up to 20%. So we just kind of kept it right within that 20% threshold.
Very good. Thank you. One of the other difficulties that we all experience, and I think we're starting to see a little bit better way to connect with people now, but were you able to connect with the community from an outreach perspective as you were considering some of these changes?
Not on the same level we normally would. I will say we had done a comprehensive operations analysis on our last major schedule change, right? And that was kind of a 2-year outreach effort. And you went to senior citizens' homes, or you went to the farmers market and events. You had different public meetings, et cetera. So this was not on that time frame. In that, we basically went from that March 13th. Decision about, okay, this is happening with COVID. And then by April 27th, right, we had made the change to our service. So just about 5 or 6 weeks there. So really what we focused on when we made that decision was, okay, we need to make people aware, like this is not going to be your normal process where you would stand at the stop and wait for the bus. So we did basically put flyers on all of our bus stops that had information about how to call or how to download the app. We did videos on our website that tried to take you straight through, okay, if you have a phone and your Android platform, right, this is the video of how to do it from Google Play, or this is the video on how to do it from the Apple platform. So we really tried to do a lot with videos and such, and then more of the physical signage. So it was kind of trying to be about awareness, but it was different than, say, when we had done it in our smaller jurisdictions. I was able to go out and help elderly people at the Yountville Veterans Home, right, download an app, and that's not something we're able to do now. So I think as a result of that, we did have more calls to dispatch in order to make reservations than we did on the app, and that was really just a product of us not being able to do as much outreach as we normally would do.
And what was the general feedback from the community, given the fact that we were all under very unusual circumstances and we couldn't operate that normal way? What was the feedback from them?
Sure. I mean, people, one thing they really liked was, so for example, we have this one senior citizens facility, and if they wanted to get to the library, right, they would have had to do 2 transfers, for example. They're a little off the beaten path on fixed route. And now with on demand, they could make kind of one call and then go directly from their facility to, for example, the library. Now the library wasn't open, but you could do, you can get books and pick them up and drop them off kind of outside. So that's something, for example, that they wanted to do. So that was huge in terms of on demand. I would say generally people like the service as long as their wait times were reasonable and their predictions were consistent. So we definitely had to do work with dispatch, because while the algorithm might assign things, right, there's some reality where sometimes they are manually reassigning things, maybe like drivers are switching and such, and then that changes the estimated wait times, right, for people. So that was maybe the biggest thing. Sometimes we'd have peaks that we didn't anticipate, or if the predictions were inconsistent. But once we kind of worked out different kinks like that along the way, I think people really appreciated the service.
So given the fact that you've made these changes and your mix between your fixed route and your on-demand is certainly shifting as you're going through that, have the destinations that people are going to change as well during this time?
Yeah, I find that people really reacted to this tier system that we had in California. For example, purple being the worst, and then yellow or green being where the most things were open. So, when we started this on-demand service, we were in either like a red or a purple. And so, obviously no restaurants were open, schools were entirely closed. Doctors' offices were closed, et cetera. So as we've kind of moved to a lesser tier and the world has more opened up, right, people are starting again to go to more of their regular destinations there, doctor's appointments there, trips to visit friends, et cetera. What we really haven't seen though yet is what's going to happen on the school front. That's really an unknown for the fall in terms of our ridership and how many students we'll see.
So as you know, Rebecca, my background is in finance, so I have to ask this question for my brethren that live in that domain and that expertise. How have your budget planning and budget meetings been going, and what does that look like as you're looking into the fall, as you're going through the next cycle?
Sure. I mean, kind of in that immediate reaction in March of 2020 was we need to basically cut as many service hours as possible, because we're looking at, okay, we're not collecting the fares. And then one of our other main sources of income is sales tax, right? And that really felt up in the air in terms of how that was going to play out. But as we saw kind of each month, especially on the sales tax side, we were more consistent. And then on the fare side of things, we were at least able to resume fares in September. We had a better idea of what that was going to look like. So come to where we are right now, where we just changed from fiscal year, right, in June, then to July, we're basically have 3 budgets that we presented to our board, right? We have, okay, this is continuing a reduced level of service via COVID, back to more of a base or to a growth scenario. And so we're basically trying to operate in the base case, which is what we think is most realistic at this time. And we were lucky enough to, in all 3 rounds of the federal stimulus, receive some funding to offset fare box losses that we had in the prior fiscal year. So we feel like that overall we're in decent shape and kind of planning for a base, although not planning for a growth scenario.
That's great. So I want to take a moment and talk about that. I mean, the scenario planning that we are not critically used to in the past is something now that is really going to become part of our future for the foreseeable time, right? As we think about that, I mean, traditional corporate America, we've been doing that for 50 years, right? But this is something very new to municipalities. And I encourage everybody to think about some of the ways that Rebecca has talked about the different scenarios, because none of us are good prognosticators about what that really is going to look like. So encourage everybody to take a lead there and certainly reach out to her, for some questions specifically. So now you're going into back to school, whatever that means at this point for you out there. I have a different version, maybe in North Carolina, but what do the changes look like for the fall? You had mentioned that a little bit earlier, but you can talk specifically about that?
Yes, so we're basically going to add 2 fixed routes to serve 1 high school and 1 middle school that have always had very high ridership for us. And we really couldn't think of a way with mainly just on demand to meet those main bell times, right? And because the students that live there really live in a really defined catchment, or people that go to school there, I should say, really live in a defined catchment area around that school. The fixed routes that we had in place before did a good job of getting the students there that need it. So we're going to be on basically a Monday through Friday basis around school hours, operating 2 additional fixed routes within the city to help to deal with that school demand. And we'll see.
Good. So last question for you. And this is one I don't think any of us really want to look at the prospects of what the fall looks like. It's, every night when I listen to the world news, I get a little bit more disenchanted. We're having some difficulty with vaccinations and extension of vaccinations. And now with the omnipresent Delta variant and cases increasing at pretty alarming rates, what type of measures and practices are you going to have to think about now through the fall as that continues?
Yeah, well, we are still requiring masks per the Transportation Security Administration. And I think the date they had set for that was we would require masks on board through September 13th at the very least. And so kind of anticipating that is going to continue and be kind of part of our new normal. And then we'll just have to wait to see if we need to go back to limiting the number of people on board again. So we didn't throw away all of the signs and ways we had cordoned off our seats, anticipating maybe having to go back to something like that. But I think in a way, whatever the fall brings, it would be more just I don't know, I would say reversing what we had done. I don't know if there'll be new things that we have to take on. It'll be more just either hitting the brake slightly or hitting the accelerator, depending on what happens.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have. And we're going to turn that back to Dave and Elizabeth and see if there's anything from the question for the chats that we can respond to or Rebecca specifically can answer. That'd be great.
Excellent. Thank you both. And if you do have questions, please submit them in the Q&A box. There's a couple that have come in directly to us. It's easier in the Q&A. Rebecca, wanted to, a lot of our members are working directly with private sector employers. And I know you touched on it a little bit, but what role do the employers play in service planning, and especially service planning moving forward during and after the pandemic, in helping identify travel needs and trip times, service hours? And is there active collaboration taking place and communication taking place between private sector employers and the transit agency?
Sure, no, makes a lot of sense. Napa is a little unique in that, unlike probably maybe some of your jurisdictions, we don't have, say, a handful of dominant employers where you're going to say, okay, these are, I don't know, our employees over 10,000. We tend to be dispersed, both in terms of numbers being relatively low to each, and then dispersed in terms of location. And so what we try to do is to work more with, say, industry groups, say like the grape growers, right, is people who would more focus on the agriculture side of things, or the vintners, which focuses more on the production and say wine hospitality side of things. So we try to work with the larger industry groups to help set kind of our hours, and then make adjustments to our routes kind of as needed as maybe new employers come on board. We do have geography on our side in some ways, in that because there's one main road down a valley, most of the major employers are situated along Route 29 and kind of the tributaries around it. So we don't have to deviate too much from there, but we do talk a lot about hours.
Excellent. And I know you had mentioned as well the stimulus dollars being used, kind of primarily to keep things safe and going along. But person's curious about if any of those dollars are being used to enhance commuter services and the user experience during the pandemic.
Sure. So, I mean, in a way, we've been using those for, say, some PPE, both that the drivers have, and then also to pass out to riders. So trying to keep them safe, even those who might not be prepared, say, coming on board. And then we are using it really to keep our operations at a reasonable level, and say maybe make that 20% cut. But if we were doing something without stimulus, right, that might have been more like the 50 or 60% cut in our service. So it's really kind of filling in that gap for us right now, and allowing us to still offer services to those in need.
There's
we did get a
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we got a question about the schools, and I actually had a question myself about that, which I'm gonna ask first, because I think that might kind of set the stage a little bit for the second question. So my first question is, when you mentioned the school routes, school ridership, is that predominantly high school students? And do you have a student pass for them? Do they have something that's for the system?
Yes, so it's middle school and high school students is kind of what we see. So really from 6th grade up. And then we don't have, quote, a school pass, but we do have a youth pass for people ages 6 to 18, which offers our normal rates for, say, an adult on the local routes, $1.60, and then the youth would pay $1.20 instead. So that kind of reduction. And then there are obviously, variations of passes, right? In terms of, okay, there's a youth reduced rate for, say, a 31-day pass or a 20 ride pass.
Sure. Okay. So first question is, for the school fixed routes, will they be time limited? So there's actually multiple questions in this. So I'll read them all, and then I can go back and read them one by one for you. So will they be time limited? And then will you be able to shift drivers and buses between fixed and on-demand service? And if so, how do you manage that switch with passengers who might be on the bus at a specific switchover time?
Yes. So I would, blocking is very key. So when we were just doing on demand, right, it was very clear, like, okay, people, drivers and the vehicle are doing on demand, right, from 7:30 to 5:30, you know, Monday through Saturday. But when we introduced the hybrid routes, person that does our blocking did try to do, okay, well, maybe we could block this really efficiently, right, at least in that person's mind at this time, and go from, person could do, you know, a regional route and then do 2 hours of on demand and then go and do a local route. But the problem is you don't know how many rides they're going to have in that on-demand period, or where they're going to be in town in order to get back to their fixed point for fixed route. So that does not work well and ends up being extremely inefficient. And then sometimes, right, you're switching riders from one vehicle to the other because that vehicle needs release to do fixed route. Tried that for 2 weeks, worst 2 weeks that have ever, I don't want to say ever occurred. There have been worse things in the world, but it did not work efficiently on our end. So we've been doing blocking basically for just on demand. That being said, or separate, I guess, say just on demand or just fixed route. So we've been separating our blocking there. We are going to be doing the one fixed route to the high school that we are going to operate in the morning and then in the afternoon. In that case, I am going to have that driver kind of help us at our on-demand peak time is actually about 2 p.m., right, which is before school lets out. So we are going to have that one driver do fixed route, then do a little on-demand in the afternoon, pick up a bit of extra, and then go back to fixed route. But that is the one and only time that we'll do it.
Excellent. All right. Another question. What is, it sounds like we got a little bit of it in the last response, but what has been the greatest challenge or barrier? And maybe we'll split that as the greatest challenge barrier from a operation standpoint, and then perhaps from a political people standpoint, during this time, and how is it being addressed?
Sure. Some of the biggest things on the operation front were, kind of, as I mentioned, making sure you get your blocking right there and just kind of exclusively blocking for either on demand or fixed routes. And then the other thing being just getting hardware right now, right? I'm sure everyone's had this happen, but demand for, say, iPads, right, which we're using to run the software, or SIM cards, or just simply basically the case and the mount that goes on the vehicle. That can be hard. With my SIM cards, I remember I kept getting thing from FedEx, like, they're on the vehicle for delivery today, right? And they weren't showing up. And, you're calling all the FedEx offices, like, there's no space for your box. I'm like, how big of a box could be in it? These are mini SIM cards. If you could take them out, like, just put them in between two other people's boxes, right? That'd be great. So just some hardware things there. And then politically, because we had done this in our smaller jurisdictions before, like the city of Napa's politicians had bought into the idea on some level, having seen it in kind of the smaller jurisdictions. So we didn't have too much, pushback on the political front necessarily. But we'll see as the world opens back up, and maybe their attention shifts from just purely COVID to some other issues.
Okay, so another question. Is there a practical size limit to the service zones, on-demand service zones, in terms of square miles? Is there an ideal size? And what is the primary limitation? The number of vehicles, the service hours, something else?
Yeah, I mean, I might have to ask TransLoc what the defined ideal size is, just because they would have more experience, but just a little bit to maybe the factors impacting us. I would say a couple things. So geographic area definitely matters. We were dealing with at the most about 7 square miles. I don't think I would ever go bigger than that in terms of how it operates, and may consider in the future, dividing that up into, say 3.5 square mile areas or something along those lines. And then there is limits on, on the vehicles in terms of the size of our vehicles. We couldn't maybe go into a small mobile home park, right, with tight turning radiuses. So that's part of the reason we were doing stop to stop and not door to door. So you got to think about the size of your vehicles and the size of your infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it, Rebecca. I think in each case, within each municipality or within each area, it's a combination of factors. It's the number of vehicles you have, the type of the vehicles that you have, and how you can address that service, and then where the demand is coming from and where it's going to try and factor in all the complexities of that model to make it work right. So I think it's hard to say that there's one area and square miles that works for everybody without knowing some of those additional variables.
Okay, on demand is a very popular topic, so I've got some more questions for you about the on demand.
Sure.
So this question is about, again, it's multiple questions, so if you need me to repeat them. How do you handle the on demand at the end of the time of service? So if on demand service runs until 11 p.m., can people request a ride up until 11? And then kind of the second part is, how have you communicated how to use the on demand? Do passengers understand that it's a shared ride?
So yes, it's like your 11 p.m. example, they can request up until 11 p.m. So it does make, say, my service hours and my revenue hours vary slightly each month, right? Than maybe it would if I was, just doing fixed route, because then you're definitely ending at 11 p.m., for example, when you do your last drop off. So, you kind of build in for that in terms of, your driver's work hours, that yes, they accept their last trip, at 11, the average trip length, right, is about 12 minutes in the city of Napa. So they can figure maybe they'll get off at 11:20 or something like that. So you do have to build that into your schedule and then expect some variation each month. And then, sorry, the second part.
Do passengers understand that it's a shared ride, and how do you communicate how to use the on-demand part?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've said that it was public transit right from the beginning, and that we've described it as like Uber Pool, for example, right, where they can pick up other people along your route, and that it wouldn't be exclusively just, say, you and your passengers. So I don't think anyone's been, say, surprised by that, in that, the people that are using the on-demand service are people who had used public transit previously. So we weren't really reaching out to, say, a new demographic in this case. And then in terms of understanding how to use it, we mainly just tried to do things on the video front. And then, right, sometimes you just have to have some very patient customer service representatives who will talk a particular individual through, right, trying to reserve a ride.
Yeah, absolutely. What performance metrics do you find to be most appropriate for on-demand service? Are they different than traditional metrics for fixed route service?
Mm-hmm. I think they're actually relatively similar, but you have to, I don't know, be realistic maybe about, you're not going to hit like maybe whatever your pre-COVID levels, so to speak, of your passengers per revenue hour are going to be less, right, than, say, something that you're doing on demand. So especially during COVID, we were trying to aim for about between 3 and 4 passengers per revenue hour, for example. And part of that was really driven too by, you can't put more than 6 people on a vehicle at a time in the peak of COVID. So you just kind of have to adjust them, but I think it's similar metrics.
Okay, I have a question for both of you. If you had a magic wand and could wave it over the entire transit tech industry, what would you wish for? Or what would you want to happen?
Well, I would like my dispatchers to have one map where they can see all vehicles at one time. Because so we have a CAT AVL system, and they use that to see the fixed routes that we're running on regional. We're using TransLoc for on demand, so they're looking at that. And then we have another program that does our ADA paratransit. And so trying to master, okay, how could someone go exactly from on-demand to fixed route and time that personally, for their end. So I guess both on the dispatcher end and then on the customer end, being able to see especially the on-demand and the fixed route in one universe. I mean, I know there's been some work on like GTFS Flex, for example, in addition to like the real-time and static GTFS that's used on fixed route, but that there's not really universal adoption there. And we haven't found a way internally to make that show both for our customers and our dispatchers.
So my response is addition to what Rebecca said, which I agree, is I think, for all of us, it's a matter of how do we make this environment from a technological standpoint as simple as we can, both from the customer experience and the operator experience. And I think that we all have to, as vendors, focus on those initiatives to simplify matters for everybody. I'm also a data geek, so I like to have as much data as I can to try and improve the performance and the efficiency of my system as quickly as I can and make reactions where I can, and then have that integrate into some of the things that Rebecca's been challenged with, and to have a good communications protocol with our users to make sure that they understand that there are a lot of things that happen during the day. Some of them we can control. I mean, poor Rebecca's, if you're out on the West Coast right now, God bless everyone, that going through the fires and some of the very big challenges that we have. And so how do you integrate an acknowledgement into your user base to make sure people understand that some changes may occur on the fly, and we want to communicate to you as quickly as we can. And as I said, the last thing that I wish for, so now since Rebecca and I are the urban and regional planner backgrounds, I would really love to see not necessarily only a technology change, but certainly a less reliance on single occupancy vehicular traffic to allow our transportation systems to do what they can, and the things that we've provided for so well in the past to be taken advantage of better. So.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, those were words right to the hearts of all of our TDM professionals out there. How do we address those drive alone commuters and get them out of their vehicles? It looks like that wraps up all of our questions for today, unless anyone has a last one they want to throw into the Q&A box while I'm wrapping up here. If not, I want to thank Rebecca and Sam for their discussion and conversation with us all. I want to thank TransLoc for their support of this webinar and their support of ACT over the years. They've been a great partner of ours, so we greatly appreciate all their support that they give us throughout the year and beyond. We look forward to seeing many of you next week in Orlando. If you're unable to join us there, we would look forward to you joining us in Atlanta for the TDM Forum, November 9th and 10th. And stay tuned for information that will be coming out on that event in the coming weeks. Our webinar series, I believe, will be off in August. We'll be returning in September. And information on that next webinar will go out in a couple of weeks. I think that is it, and we will give you back a few minutes of time for everyone's day.
Yeah, thanks for all the good questions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Special thanks to Rebecca and her thought leadership and what she's doing out there. It's great to see transit professionals with her experience and help, and certainly all the things that y'all are doing at ACT that make our industry better. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day.